Standover man Rodney Atkinson, known as Goldie, is behind bars again after being arrested in Sydney on drugs charges.
Honestly, that's why people get away with pedophilia and all that stuff, because nothing ever happens to them. They get sent into a jail, they're on protection.
Rodney Goldie Atkinson was once one of Sydney's most feared enforcers, known for his ruthless actions and ties to the notorious Brothers 4 Life gang. But what led to his dramatic downfall? Was it betrayal, personal mistakes, or something darker? Join us as we uncover the shocking rise and fall of a man who terrified the streets, only to see his empire crumble in the face of relentless law enforcement. Stay tuned to find out how Goldie went from Sydney's most feared to a man with everything to lose. Rodney Atkinson, known as Goldie, wasn't born with the kind of silver spoon you might imagine. Raised in Sydney's gritty suburbs, Goldie's early life was shaped by hardship and the rough-and-tumble world around him. His beginnings weren't glamorous. In fact, his upbringing in the unforgiving areas of Western Sydney was a recipe for trouble. The harsh realities of the streets had a way of swallowing you up, especially when you didn't have much to rely on. But where some would fall, Goldie saw an opportunity to rise. Early on, he joined a series of local street gangs, but none stood out like the infamous Brothers 4 Life. This was no ordinary gang. This was a brotherhood, and one that was constantly expanding its criminal reach. With a reputation for violence, the gang was a major player in Sydney's underworld. Goldie's connection to them wasn't just about protection or affiliation. It was about establishing power. He knew exactly where he wanted to be in this world, at the top. His rise within the Brothers 4 Life didn't happen overnight, but he quickly earned a reputation as someone not to be messed with. Goldie's role within the gang was clear. He was an enforcer. In simple terms, if something needed to be done with force, Goldie was the guy. Whether it was collecting debts, intimidating rivals, or taking care of business with his fists, Goldie was always ready. He was feared, respected, and in some cases, even admired for his ability to take control of any situation. Goldie's first taste of real power came through his involvement in the gang's drug trade. Sydney's streets were flooded with illegal substances, and anyone who wanted to make money had to be willing to get their hands dirty. Goldie didn't hesitate. He saw the lucrative potential in drug trafficking, and like a seasoned player in a high-stakes game, he jumped right in. With his fierce loyalty to the Brothers 4 Life and his growing reputation for handling things violently, it wasn't long before he became one of the gang's most prominent figures. But what made Goldie different from others in the underworld was his strategic mind. He wasn't just a brute force, he was a planner. While many would have seen his role as a simple enforcer, Goldie understood the deeper layers of power. He wasn't just making money, he was carving out a name for himself as a mastermind. His ability to navigate both the physical and psychological aspects of his work made him a dangerous individual. It wasn't just about who you could beat, it was about who you could control. Goldie knew how to manipulate people, and he used that to his advantage. The Brothers 4 Life's criminal empire started to grow. With Goldie at the helm of their more violent operations, their influence spread further across Sydney's underbelly. But with this growth came new threats. Rival gangs saw the success of the Brothers 4 Life, and some wanted in, while others wanted to take them down. Goldie's rise was inextricably linked to conflict, and the higher he climbed, the more enemies he made. Still, Goldie remained unfazed. His power wasn't just in numbers, it was in his fearsome reputation. He wasn't a man who could be intimidated. Whether he was standing in a dimly lit bar negotiating with another gang, or confronting someone face to face, he exuded a confidence that put others on edge. His physical presence, paired with a sharp, calculating mind, made him a dangerous combination. His confidence was unwavering, and he was willing to push people to their limits and beyond to maintain his control. At this point, Goldie wasn't just an enforcer. He had become a key figure in the criminal landscape of Sydney. His influence was undeniable, and his grip on the criminal network was tightening. But, as with all great empires, this one too would eventually crumble. Goldie had built his world on intimidation and fear, but as time would show, those very things would be the forces that eventually led to his downfall. What Goldie couldn't foresee was how quickly things could change when you've made as many enemies as he had. With the law always lurking and rivals eager to see him fall, the cracks in his empire were beginning to show. His story, as remarkable as it was ruthless, was about to take a turn he couldn't have predicted. By the time Rodney Goldie Atkinson fully cemented his position with the Brothers 4 Life Gang, Sydney's criminal landscape was practically in his hands. The gang was no longer just a street-level operation. It had grown into a significant force, involved in everything from drug trafficking to extortion. Goldie had risen within the ranks to become one of the key players in the gang's operations, an enforcer who instilled fear and commanded respect. The Brothers 4 life was built on a foundation of power and loyalty, and Goldie understood this better than anyone. But loyalty in this world wasn't always about honor. It was about survival. Goldie ruled with an iron fist, ensuring his reputation was one of relentless force. When it came to enforcing the gang's rules, no one questioned Goldie. He dealt with problems swiftly, and his name alone was enough to make most people comply with the gang's demands. His role was to keep the gang's enemies at bay, manage the tough jobs, and eliminate any threats. Goldie wasn't just about brutality, though. His power came not just from his violent reputation, but from his deep understanding of the criminal world. He knew when to negotiate, when to press, and when to pull back. His street smarts, combined with a no-nonsense attitude, made him a master manipulator, often using fear to keep his position secure. But Goldie's strength didn't just lie in his ability to intimidate. It was in his capacity to control the flow of information, influence the right people, and ensure that no one could move without his approval. Yet, for all the power he wielded, Goldie was also walking a dangerous line. Rival gangs, seeing the Brothers 4 life's rise, were quick to move in, wanting to slice off a piece of the criminal empire for themselves. The underworld of Sydney was a cutthroat business, and Goldie knew better than anyone that it was only a matter of time before someone tried to take his throne. But this didn't faze him. Goldie was always ready for a fight, and he never backed down from a challenge. His role as an enforcer became even more important as the Brothers 4 life expanded into more lucrative and high-risk ventures, such as the distribution of drugs. The operation brought in vast amounts of money, but also drew the attention of the authorities. Goldie knew the law was always looking for someone to bring down, but for a time, it seemed like he was untouchable. His ability to stay out of sight from law enforcement while continuing to grow his empire was a testament to his cunning and resourcefulness. However, as his empire grew, so did the pressure. Goldie was no longer just dealing with local street-level dealers or minor criminals. He was at the heart of a massive criminal syndicate, and with that came bigger problems. Police forces began putting more resources into cracking down on the Brothers 4 life, and rivals began to plot against him. Goldie had made powerful enemies, both within and outside his gang, and it was clear that maintaining control would take more than just fear. While Goldie seemed to have everything under control on the surface, the seeds of his downfall were beginning to take root. The more power he gained, the more enemies he made. And in the world he inhabited, that's a dangerous combination. By the time the infamous Raptor Blitz operation hit Sydney's streets, Rodney Goldie Atkinson had become an indelible figure in the city's criminal world. It wasn't just another routine crackdown. It was a coordinated, massive effort by law enforcement to dismantle the criminal networks that had been wreaking havoc on Sydney for years. The Blitz was aimed at those operating in the shadows, and Goldie, who had once seemed untouchable, was now squarely in the crosshairs. Goldie had evaded the authorities for a long time, a ghost who had always managed to stay ahead of the game. His network had remained solid, and the enforcer's reputation was built on his cunning as much as his brute force. But the Raptor Blitz changed everything.
Police swooped on homes right across Western Sydney in a coordinated blitz and say they're not done yet.
Law enforcement wasn't playing around anymore. They were coming after the big fish. For a while, Goldie maintained his composure. He knew the drill. Avoid the cameras, change his location often, and make it difficult for the police to get a handle on him. But the net was closing in. The stakes had become much higher, and it was no longer just about avoiding jail. It was about taking down the entire operation he'd worked so hard to build. The raids were swift and ruthless. Law enforcement descended on suspected drug dens, stash houses, and properties linked to the Brothers 4 life. As Goldie's name came up again and again in investigations, the pressure mounted. And in a twist that surprised even those closest to him, it wasn't the police that ultimately captured him. It was betrayal from within. His gang, once so fiercely loyal, had started to fracture. As the authorities cracked down on the Brothers 4 life, the cracks in Goldie's empire became more apparent. The weight of the law, combined with the increasing desperation of his associates, led to several members of the gang cooperating with the police. Informants began spilling information about Goldie's whereabouts, and it wasn't long before the police were closing in. The day of Goldie's arrest was swift, dramatic, and, for many, a moment that would become part of Sydney's criminal history. The notorious enforcer, once feared across the city, was finally brought to justice. The image of Goldie, shackled and surrounded by officers, was a stark contrast to the man who had once controlled the streets. The fall of Goldie wasn't just the end of one man's reign. It was the beginning of the collapse of the Brothers Four life gang. What was once a criminal empire built on fear and intimidation had now begun to crumble thanks to a massive, coordinated effort by law enforcement, combined with the internal betrayals that no one saw coming. Goldie's arrest marked a new chapter in Sydney's war on organized crime, but it also marked the beginning of a deep personal reckoning for him. As the consequences of his empire building came crashing down, Goldie would have to face not just the police, but also the very people he thought would remain loyal to him forever. Goldie's arrest was only the beginning. With his capture, the fight for his freedom entered a new, far more public phase: the trial. The courtroom became the stage for Goldie's last stand, where he was forced to confront the very empire he had built. His trial was a media spectacle, with newspapers and news stations covering every detail. It wasn't just a trial for one man. It was a trial for the Brothers for life, a symbol of the violent underworld Goldie had dominated for years. Goldie stood in the dock facing serious charges. He wasn't just accused of the usual crimes tied to street gangs, drug trafficking, assault, and extortion. This was the big leagues. His involvement in orchestrating brutal attacks, smuggling drugs on a massive scale, and wielding influence across multiple criminal enterprises made him a target for everything from racketeering to violent crime charges. The public, who had once viewed him as a mythical figure in Sydney's criminal underworld, were now watching him unravel in real time. The enforcer who had been feared and revered was facing life in prison. But throughout the entire trial, Goldie remained defiant. He never gave up the fight. He attempted to downplay his role in the gang, arguing that his actions were simply a product of the environment he was forced into. Yet, the evidence stacked against him was irrefutable. Law enforcement had left no stone unturned, and witnesses, many of whom had once feared Goldie, now lined up to testify against him. One of the most shocking aspects of the trial wasn't just the charges, it was the level of betrayal that surfaced. Associates who had once stood by Goldie's side were now testifying against him, offering damning details about the inner workings of the Brothers for life. It was clear that the loyalty Goldie had so carefully cultivated was crumbling. This sense of betrayal struck hard, not just because of the information being revealed, but because it showed just how deeply corruption and mistrust had infiltrated his world. As the trial wore on, the reality of the situation hit Goldie harder. For years, he had manipulated people, crushed his enemies, and carefully constructed his empire. Now, he was a man with nowhere to hide, his reputation tarnished, and his former allies becoming witnesses against him. The media frenzy only added fuel to the fire, painting a picture of a violent, ruthless gang leader brought low by his own greed and hubris. At the end of the trial, the verdict was inevitable: guilty on multiple charges. The court sentenced Goldie to a long stretch behind bars, effectively ending his reign in Sydney's criminal world. While Goldie's time in court had come to an end, the fallout from his trial extended far beyond the courtroom. His conviction shattered the image of invincibility he had so carefully constructed. As one of the last major players of the Brothers for life, Goldie's downfall didn't just affect him, it sent ripples through the entire criminal network. The brothers, once united under his iron grip, now found themselves scrambling to pick up the pieces of their fractured empire. Despite all this, Goldie never truly accepted his fate. Even in prison, his story remained the subject of whispered conversations among those who had known him, and his legacy was one of both fear and admiration. His fall from grace was the end of an era for Sydney's underworld, but it would not be the last chapter in the violent history of the Brothers for life. Goldie's time in prison wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of his transformation from a feared enforcer to a cautionary tale. Locked away from the world he once controlled, he had plenty of time to reflect on the empire he built, and the mistakes that ultimately tore it down. The story of Goldie wasn't just about power and violence. It was about how fleeting both can be. But even behind bars, Goldie's name continued to echo in the underworld. He may have lost his freedom, but the legacy of Rodney Goldie Atkinson lived on, shaping the next generation of criminals who sought to rise through similar paths. His story was one of ambition and brutality, but also one of betrayal. The very people who helped build his empire had no qualms about taking him down when the heat was on. Though Goldie would likely argue that he was just a product of his environment, his downfall showed how easily the world of organized crime could turn against its own. His rise and fall were a testament to the fact that loyalty in this world is fragile, and that one can only push their luck for so long. As for the brothers for life, the group that once seemed unstoppable slowly disbanded after Goldie's fall. With the police breathing down their necks and their enforcer behind bars, the gang lost its grip on the streets. It wasn't just Goldie's arrest that brought them down. It was the ripple effect of his betrayal and the fractures within the gang itself. Goldie's story is one of both triumph and tragedy. He was a man who had it all: power, respect, and wealth, but lost it all in the blink of an eye. His reign as one of Sydney's most feared enforcers came to an abrupt end, but his story will be remembered for the violence, manipulation, and betrayal that defined his rise and fall. In the end, it was the very traits that made him such a formidable figure that also led to his demise. Goldie may have lost his freedom, but his name still resonates in Sydney's criminal history. His legacy, like that of many who rise to power in such a ruthless world, serves as a grim reminder: the higher you climb, the harder you fall.